Hi, Adam. I am back. We are here ready to record. This is segment number 3 for us. Working on this difficult topic, and we're going to kind of
Yes.
jump right back into it. Today, we were going to begin with the topic of navigating adultery, which is a hard one, tough one for a lot of people, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
And I think a little bit different maybe for me than for some people. So how should we begin this?
Well, so with just how you framed that, like, I'm sorry, all my therapist flags were like, wait a second, hit record. We gotta process this because sure, our stories are all unique, but I think it's an interesting thought process that what you experienced is so different than other people who have navigated maybe having adultery in their relationships. Like, where would you start? Why do you feel like it was different?
That's a good question. And it could be really interesting to kind of unpack this because there might be, I will say this straight up, that might be an area that I haven't fully explored yet. And maybe I will feel like my story mirrors what other people have shared with me more, the more that I unpack it. But the reason that I say it seems a lot different for me is in having conversations with women specifically who have been in a relationship where adultery was present, have really seemed to struggle with that piece because to me, it feels like they still were really in love with that person when the adultery took place. And so they expressed struggling with the frustration and feeling just betrayed and having difficulty with trust and all of those things around that adultery piece, but not wanting to give up on the relationship because of the fact that they still very much love this person. And in my experience, it didn't feel that way to me because I think at the point where adultery entered the picture, I had already been so hurt by this person and had distanced myself in a way from that love part of the relationship that wasn't really there for me anymore. I was more in survival mode, thinking about my kids and a lot less about my place in this relationship and our future in the space of love. It just didn't feel like love anymore.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that attachment that I feel like a lot of people do. So in that way, it felt different to me.
And it makes sense when you're able to verbalize it that way, because what I'm also hearing you say is basically like, Adam, I had long-term exposure to trauma in this relationship where when I do sit down with couples and the adultery component has come out, it's more of that short-term immediate trauma of like, oh, I was blindsided by this, where throughout your story and your experience, you sort of highlight that you had this process of like proxy grieving, like as you continued to be let down, you came to accept like my relationship is not going to have certain capacities when it comes to love.
Yeah, exactly. It
And so
wasn't
that
a
makes
shock, I
sense.
guess.
Yeah, because it was almost like it was the next like cog in the mechanism.
Yeah.
Like you've been on this journey long enough that sadly this makes sense.
Yeah, it's the natural progression, right?
Mm,
And it almost in the moment, yes, I was frustrated, but I actually found myself more frustrated at the women involved because I knew them. But in some ways it felt like a relief to me because it seemed like the possibility for a transition lied within this construct. And it's like, okay, here's an opportunity for change to happen. And I hadn't had anything like that come up that felt like a big upheaval potential for change and positive movement forward, which it doesn't generally seem to be the response. Because, a lot of people experience adultery in a relationship that really, in a lot of ways, is still overall a healthy relationship and they they're doing well. There's just this piece comes in for whatever reason, and then in that case it would be much more I feel like it in and of itself would be much more
Yeah.
traumatic as an isolated incident.
Wow. I'm sort of sitting here just chewing on that for a second because, like, I mean, I think that that's another component of long-term exposure to trauma is in traumatic instances like this. And when I've worked with, whether it's been PTSD, certain traumas from war or loss, it's almost like your life goes to your living in a vacuum. And so when you talked about this stepping in and being a catalyst for change, it's almost like someone opens a window and all of a sudden you have a place to flow to. You were stuck in sort of the fact there felt like there was nowhere to go. And now it was like someone has opened a window or a door and I could potentially go, okay, this is it. It's also a surprising insight to sort of point out to others that look at what we're willing to go through. We don't want to go through, but what we're willing to go through before we'll give ourselves permission to say, okay, this is done.
Right. Yeah. And even in that moment, that wasn't my go-to, which in the past, before having gone through this whole experience, I would have said, no, that's definitely that would be a line for me, right? But then having been in that situation for that long, your mind doesn't always function the way you would expect it to. And it wasn't for me. It wasn't a line. It was a transition to potentially, in my mind, better situation, which I could have never imagined myself thinking like that before. And it's interesting the way that has carried over into my current relationship. So a lot of women I've talked to who have been in a relationship where there was adultery, the lack of trust that is naturally a byproduct of that often carries over into a new relationship. And then there's fear around that happening again. And it makes total sense, right? I completely understand why that happens. Even though it's a different person, it's still something that you experienced in a relationship, and that carries over. Well, for me, I didn't experience that. I don't have what I expect that of myself, but it's not there. And I don't really understand that. I don't really know why. But in my current relationship with my husband, I have complete trust of him. I don't fear that from him. And I know a lot of that is due to his reliability. He's just a very reliable person. I don't have to worry about him. But even if you have a really reliable person, if you've experienced adultery in the past, it can be really a fearful thing, whether it's grounded in reality or not.
Correct.
And I don't have that. We've had conversations about adultery. We've had conversations about, other women in our circles, and I never have that pop up for me, which I find odd. But I wonder if it's because of the way that the adultery was received in my original relationship, if that's why it doesn't manifest that way, because it didn't really bring up those feelings for me then either.
Yeah. Well, even when I've walked with couples through someone has experienced adultery and now we're in a new and different relationship, a powerful realization is there's a book called The Body Keeps a Score. And the book essentially brings us into the understanding that like our bodies are essentially like cell phone towers and they're receiving signals even when people aren't talking. And so what I notice a lot is even when we've been hurt in the past by a specific trauma, it becoming present in my life right now is normally rooted in a feeling that could be alike. And so normally, when I'm working with men in this position and they're like, but I haven't ever cheated on her, or I've never abused her in that way. Why would she recoil or she become hesitant? There's still insecurity somewhere in there
Mhm.
where when you've framed up the relationship you haven't said that it's free of challenges. I know that any relationship is going to have challenges, but I think like you're highlighting here, the relationship has security and stability in a certain way that
Mhm.
then those certain trauma responses aren't sort of being pulled on. You're not having those same sort of like someone's pulling strings. Those same
Right.
strings aren't being touched. And so when we're talking about, well, in the end, we want to really have this be a resource on how we do build better relationships, is being able to verbalize in moments like that, of being able to sit back and say, I know that maybe that wasn't flirting or you weren't trying to make advance to someone, but when you talk in that way about that person, all of a sudden it brings up what I call ghosts of my past, because we all have ghosts in our past. And our loved one might not see it, but we see it. And us being able to call out in certain ways, like these certain things elicit an emotional response in me, that helps us not only become more vulnerable and turn towards our loved one, but we actually give our loved one the ability to turn towards us and choose us.
Mhm. Yeah, and it helps them just to understand what we're going through. Communication's huge. We've talked about
And
that.
it's difficult.
And it's difficult. It is probably my biggest weakness. Like I struggle so much with communicating. Um, and I've known it for a long time, and the improvements have been small in comparison to the amount of time I've been working on them.
Yeah.
So it's a ongoing process for sure.
Well, if our whole lives are going to be perfecting communication, I think that's a good way to keep us off of the frustration train of like, oh, why do I have to keep working on this? Because our whole lives, it's going to be something that we are continuing to perfect. Like right now, I have an 8-month pregnant wife at home. Like I didn't realize that I had the communication difficulties that I do until my wife was 8 months pregnant. I'm like, oh, I recognize now that, in my own ignorance, I didn't realize that certain things you see as me, emotionally isolating, or like
Yeah.
she's never been a wife who has needed to be showered with verbal affection, but like just little things that I realized that, I guess in the busyness of life, I left out, which was like, oh, you look beautiful today. She's
Yeah, those
becoming
things
extreme.
matter.
Yeah, they do. And so here's a crazy thing, Lindsay. I normally say that like all the time, and I don't know what it was of like I I genuinely, like, she was in tears the other day. It was like,
Oh,
you haven't really commented on my appearance. And I was like, I still find you absolutely gorgeous. Like, how can I not find you gorgeous? You're growing our child. Like,
right.
but you're right. I haven't been saying it. And I recognize that I think there's a component of I didn't want to call out her body change because I thought she'd be sensitive to it. But my silence was
Yes.
worse than me actually saying, like, oh my goodness. Like, and so it has been fun these last few weeks of saying things, because like she clicked into the 8th month like last week, and I walked out and I said, it looks like you've popped. And she laughed and she's like, thank you for saying it, because I feel like
Yes.
I've popped. And
Yes.
I was like, your tummy was just different before, but in a week it seems like, wow, there is a baby there.
Yeah.
And so I think we forget how, again, there's all these nonverbal cues and these little verbal cues that are sort of like those stepping stones either towards connectiveness or away from connectiveness.
Right. And her man, her verbalizing that to you is so huge. Like the fact that she even expressed it, because there would be me in that situation coming up with all these reasons in my mind, why isn't happening anymore. And it wouldn't be accurate reasons, right?
True.
Um and then there's like resentment that builds and it just piles on, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is true for you, but I think for a lot of men, as their wife, carries a child for the first time, there's this different level of respect that you get for a female body and what they're capable of and what they're going through. And unconsciously, that could change the way that you verbalize what you're seeing and feeling about your
Mhm.
wife. Like that could come across differently, and that could have been a piece of what changed for you. But yeah, she's going to take it as he doesn't think I'm beautiful.
Yes. Like a total different direction.
Right.
And I was like, I'll have to tell you, I was surprised in my own response because afterwards I sat back and I recognized that like if we hadn't known each other for 15 years, if we were in a different time in my relationship, would have I become defensive? Because there was a part of me that was like, wanted to go down that road of like, of course not. But then I was like, wait a second. Like, she's being vulnerable in this moment.
Mhm.
Like, there is a legitimate fear. How do we move into that? And I think that this is another component of that communication bit of we have to give our spouse the room to surprise us. Like
Mhm.
we may say in our head, I've had this conversation over and over, and this is how they're going to respond. But if we don't allow them to surprise us, then we start to sort of build our self-fulfilling prophecies, and
Mhm.
it's only more of like a validation inside of us off of faulty information to continue going in a path that farther drifts us apart.
For sure. And I find myself falling into that trap all the time where, maybe I'm talking to my therapist about something that's a frustration in my relationship. And he's like, well, you need to communicate this in this way. And I'm like, well, I already know what he's going to say, or I already know what he thinks. And it's like, you really don't. You really don't. Just try it and see. And a lot of times I am surprised. And I've found that for us in couples therapy, where when we're talking back and forth on a topic, a lot of times what I expect him to say isn't what he says. Yeah. So that's a really good side note.
Well, I think this conversation goes hand in hand into the next one that we were going to talk about, which was babysitting your spouse.
Yes.
Because when we are talking about having these conversations solely in our own head, that's babysitting our spouse. We're making assumptions to what we believe that they need and how we're going to caretake for them in that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a huge component of your story that you've shared was the side of you that you removed yourself from being an emotionally intimate individual in this relationship. Now, he also chose to put you in that spot, but then you were solely in this babysitting role.
Yeah, and it was very unhealthy for both of us. Yeah, for the relationship itself as well. And I think that carries back to the adultery piece also, in that a part of why I don't find myself struggling, I think, with my current relationship and fears around that is it helped me to see that your spouse is going to be who they are, really, regardless of what you do. You can try to control it, which I did, and try to make things as good as possible. But in the end, they are who they are, and they're going to do what they're going to do. And no amount of control is going to change that, who they are. And I want to see who they actually are. I want to see them for who they are. If they are somebody who's going to commit adultery, I'd rather know that straight up and not have it blindside me because I kept it at bay for multiple years before it finally reared its head for what it is, And that was that piece that kind of, I think, finally hit me when I was in that relationship. And my spouse had, committed adultery multiple times, and I talked him into going to that therapist, a counselor, and he said, your wife needs to know where you are 24/7. She needs to be able to ask questions, and you need to be able to be honest and open with her. And I'm like, I don't need another child. I don't want another kid that I have to babysit. And it's that piece of, I guess, really wanting to know who you're working with and who you're dealing with, not in the way of like, I'm going to sit here and grill you all day to make sure that you're where I want you to be, but just giving that space for them to be who they truly are. And that communication is a piece of that too. Asking them, what do they actually mean by that? Or why is this happening? And being open to the response, whether it is the painful one maybe you were expecting, or a
Mm.
completely different one that you weren't.
Well, in that adultery component, also, I feel like so much of it is also based in a compartmentalization of a relationship. And so, when we first get into relationships, we aren't thinking, man, this is a person I want to suffer with for the rest of my life.
Oh,
Like,
but
let's
what
just
a
pay,
great perspective.
like, let's just go ahead and pay bills and then die. And that's why I would like to get together with you. And this is like the sad part of when we make life too serious or we lose perspective on what life is. And in a lot of cases, when I've worked with people when it comes to adultery, we can hear the natural progression in the relationship from being a space where we were collaborating and we were sharing life to all of a sudden one spouse becomes like the toxic waste dump for the other.
Mm,
And so we share the worst things with them, but then we feel, oh, well, I've said this about them, or I think this about them, and now I can't be intimate with them. So I use adultery as the next compartmentalization. Oh, I
okay.
can have all this gourmet and physical intimacy with this other person, but then they don't have to actually know about my other three quadrants of life
Yeah.
because, well, she's going to hold that for me. And then I'm upset because now why is she asking questions? Or why does she feel like she has a right to the physical intimacy? And it is a very narcissistic approach, but I think if we're honest with ourselves, most of the time when we hurt other people, we're using narcissistic traits.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yeah.
deciding that no, my needs are actually more valid or worthy than yours. And
Yeah.
we use our own justifications to sort of trap ourselves into becoming a version of ourselves we never thought was possible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a weird spiraling hole.
It is.
And that,
Like,
that is actually, that understanding has kept me from communication in the past. So there has to be a healthy balance there, because
yeah.
I have found that in a lot of my communications, even just this last week with my therapist, where he's like, you need to talk to your spouse about this topic. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, but really, it's just, these are needs that I have and his are different. And what makes mine any more important or valid than his? And the conversation isn't going to change his needs. It's not going to change my needs. So it feels like you're at an impasse. It feels like pointless to spend the time and energy on this thing. And I can find myself stuck because of that mindset. I do that a lot.
Well, I think that goes hand in hand with what you talk about of, man, you are a great survivalist. So you're always trying to conserve resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this case, you're like, oh no, I'm conserving energy. Like, but that's not true because I'm also spending the energy on the things I'm not saying.
Yeah.
So, or
and
the
they're
thought
a big
process.
energy dump.
Oh, yes, they are. Like, it is drawing down on you every day when you don't say those things because those silent resentments come in.
Yeah.
And so we're just like, we're electing to bring in other things in our lives. It's funny because I resonated with what you just said on, I remember when my wife and I first got married that we were in that power struggle a little bit about sharing our needs. And the power struggle, I mean, is like, why is it that we conceptualize that me saying what my needs are is me grabbing the microphone? Like, if I say this, it'll be a burden. A lot of times that comes out of our family of origins of like feeling like, we're supposed to be seen, not heard, or
right.
I can't be, I'm always complaining. And it's like, well, no, if you're feeling misery and you're saying this hurts, you're not complaining.
Right.
But you can't just rub dirt on everything in your life and think that it's all going to come out fine. Some things will actually fester into larger wounds. So I love to try to utilize the thought process of, am I sharing this to cause hurt, or am I sharing this to bring clarity?
Right.
Like me saying that, this action has been hurtful for me, or in doing this action, I feel more distant from you, is different than me saying, well, I want to catch you doing wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Those motives make a huge difference.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's the other sort of awareness to have when you're walking through, potential adultery with if your significant other is the idea of, well, are we holding ledgers? Because if we're holding ledgers and we're essentially in this constant conversation point of trying to point out who's the worst person, what are we hiding behind that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why?
Well, and it doesn't get you anywhere. It just keeps you stuck.
No.
There's no forward
that's
momentum.
how we use that's how we use that justification though. I'm like, well, I'm not that bad because she does this, or he did that. And so I'm
using
okay
somebody else's behavior to justify your own. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting I don't know. It adds a lot of challenges to a relationship. And, the way that people approach it, everybody does it differently. And I know when that therapist was like, you need to be able to know where your husband is. I know a lot of women who that kind of was their way of managing their fear around it, was feeling like they had access. I need to have access and be able to have this to keep me at peace and to keep my fear at bay. But I don't know how helpful that is. I know for me, it wasn't going to be helpful. I didn't have capacity for all that babysitting.
Well, and I don't think you're wrong in this, because where my clinical cap goes as a therapist is I have never seen those interventions work out to building better connection in a relationship, because we go back to the compartmentalization.
Yeah.
Okay. The non-offending spouse is going to keep the offending spouse from doing this again.
Yeah. What it like?
No, I mean, you're setting them up for failure all over again, because the best relationship that you can have with your significant other is one that's not rooted in power.
Right.
If either one of you are seeking power, we're not in it. We're not in the right spot. And in reality, what happens is we end up building more like neurotic functioning in the non-offending spouse, because now he or she has to become the historian of the other spouse. I know where you are. I'm doing all these things. What happens when like Life 360 is sending you text messages and someone's going for a drive, and this is like, and I have sat down with couples that I know that the relationships didn't turn out. They didn't continue with me. And I'm not saying I am the answer to all, couples things, but if you are continuing to try to find control in your life, you're going to really keep rallying against the fact that you have very little control in life, especially in a relationship that's like a marriage. You are not going to be able to have two unique individuals make a lifelong decision to live together and then feel like you're going to be able to shepherd that through in absolute control.
Right.
My spouse is going to let me down at times, and it doesn't have to be adultery. It's going to be like not meeting my needs. Right.
Right.
But there's this idea of like, oh, they're never going to hurt me. Actually, the reason why we have the commitment we do is I'm going to love you despite moments where you didn't do the best thing by me. Yeah.
And those things will happen. Yeah. I feel like that approach where, you're babysitting your spouse, it sets a relationship, a healthy relationship has to be able to be built on trust. And trust doesn't look like babysitting your spouse. And if you have to do that with your spouse, you're already in a tough place. Yeah. And then it's like children, they rise to the level of the expectations you put on them. And if your expectation for your spouse is that they can't maintain their commitment to you unless you are babysitting them, you're just putting them at a lower level. It's like taking your spouse and pulling the rug out from under them, and they're sitting there on their butt. And you're going to hold them down there. Like, they need to be able to have space to rise and raise their own expectations for themselves. And that was, I think, my approach to it was with that mindset, but also I didn't have the capacity for babysitting somebody. Like, I don't have time or space for this, and let's just see where he actually falls, because I want to know what I'm really working with.
Well, you're also trying to keep two little flesh blobs alive.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on, and I just think that in so many ways, I think maybe that suggestion by that therapist, because it's not just an isolated incident. Normally, like therapist or a family member, someone will say, this is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Track him and have a routine. And I can hear that their attempt is based in wanting repair, wanting healing, wanting you guys not to break up. That's wonderful. But sometimes we have to recognize that we can be extremely harmful in our suggestions when it's based off of maybe us not wanting to experience the discomfort that our friend or family member is already actively experiencing.
Right. A lot of those types of suggestions, I feel like, are focused on dissipating an uncomfortable feeling, and not always is it. I mean, most of the time it's actually better for us to do what doesn't feel comfortable. I mean, I can think of almost any situation where your outcome is going to be better if you allow yourself to feel those uncomfortable feelings. And, the lack of trust is a natural byproduct of somebody having committed adultery. And you're going to feel that, and you're going to have those fears, and just placating them with babysitting doesn't actually help the root of the problem in the end. So, yes. That's my experience with that one.
Yep.
But that we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the effects on children. You just mentioned I was trying to keep two little flesh blobs alive, and in our situation, that task was a little bit more difficult because of the fact that we didn't have running water.
Yeah.
We had such a small space, so it was really hard to keep them away from some of the things that were going on. If there was an argument in the house, they were right there. I mean, there was no go to the other room. It's one room.
Yeah, exactly.
So anything that's going on, they're part and partial to it. And, keeping them, it was really high on my priority list to keep them away from things that were going to traumatize them. But if you're in an abusive relationship, they are going to be experiencing trauma too. And that was something that I recognized, and in the end was my reason finally for leaving. But I did not realize how much it was going to affect them until later in life when I watched it play out. And I can just say, even if they're little, which mine were little by the time I left, 3 and 4 years old, that's still a lot of time to build trauma responses in a child. and it's extremely damaging for them. It's not a healthy thing.
And sometimes we get stuck in this thought process as adults that because I've heard this from clients before of like, oh, well, they're still young enough, they don't really know what's going on. You're absolutely right. They don't know what's going on, but remember, they're in a developmental stage, especially that 2 to 5 year window, where they don't know what's going on, but they're learning everything through role modeling.
Yeah.
So they are conditioning themselves to survive because they also recognize we're extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, the hardest work I ever did was working with foster children, because these children have been conditioned, especially if they've been in the system their entire life, they're conditioned that everything in life is conditional. And so if they felt like you were pulling away, all of a sudden they'd pour the love on, like physically holding you, physically like trying their best to like, no, don't leave me. And you'd sit there and you'd be like, wow, this 6 or 7 year old, like, But then you realize, like, this is also the kid that at 2 or 3 was being shipped around to different homes and was having that like reactive attachment disorder of all of a sudden I feel very close and connected with someone, and then the next day that person's not in my life anymore. And so noticing how people move through that. And so, like, when you even talk about like 3 and 4, sure, they had enough to understand the role modeling of that. I think that where the power is in your story is when you had that like last sit down where they were like, the pastor was trying to tell you that, you were somehow commanded to give him another chance, all this other good jazz. Wonderful. Like, when you decided, no, I'm going to choose me, I don't know if it was on the forefront of your mind, but you chose your daughters at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many times, people will say, well, I've got to do this for the kids. And I know that this is going to go against what maybe the church and faith-based homes want to hear, but the research has actually come out that staying together for the kids is actually inherently more damaging to the children than homes that are broken. And I think this is based off of a misconception, because we go, well, kids need a mother and a father. I completely agree with that, but they need a mother and a father who can communicate in healthy manners.
Yeah.
And what normally ends up happening is the children become collateral, and we see triangulation, where all of a sudden, instead of having a conversation with my spouse about what makes me frustrated with them, I'm sowing that discontent in my children. And I'm now trying to use them as a justification, as almost like my witness or jury box of like, oh, see how bad my spouse is. And so I want to encourage people, like, maybe because your kids are silent on the matter, maybe because you don't see it actually coming out verbally with your kids, doesn't mean that your kids aren't soaking up that malice that you're sharing in between to your spouse. They aren't old enough, nor are they responsible for being able to tell you the damage that they're experiencing in that moment.
Yeah, and it perpetuates the behavior. Then we see these generational situations where the kiddos saw it, and inevitably, a lot of times we learn from our parents and we look for things that are different, but a lot of times we repeat things that we see because it's all we know. And with my daughters, no, they don't have a lot of memories of some of the things that I do. So they don't have their perspective, thank goodness, was positive on their experience. We were able to keep that framed in a way where they look back at that time and they have really good memories, which I'm so thankful for. But where it shows up is their nervous systems. And, I see things that trigger them, and then they're responding from a fight or flight or freeze. I see where they struggle to communicate things because out of fear for or not being willing to take up space. I find those are the ways where I see these things play out in them. They don't have those memories. They're not talking about horrific experiences. But if I had allowed that to continue, they would have. And I remember it really was my kids, and I'm glad I had them, because I don't know how clearly I would have been able to think without them. They really were a very grounding force for me in everything. But it was that moment in the cabin where I had prayed, please help me know if this is still worth continuing to invest in, because I just am about out of capacity for this. And he made that comment about the girl on the screen. And it was in that moment I said, this is no longer the best place for my kids.
Yeah.
Them watching this as an example of what a marriage should look like is only going to create issues for them down the road when they try to find a partner. And it can be really helpful to have them almost as like a grounding, because you can continue to set yourself to the side for a really long time. But it's a little harder, at least in my case, it was way harder for me to set my kids aside and be like, well, I'll sacrifice you for what I wanted this to be. I didn't feel like I could do that. So,
I mean, what a powerful statement you just said there, which is, am I willing to sacrifice my children in the present for what I wanted? Not what I have, but what I wanted. And I think people don't have that thought process enough, as that's what I'm doing. I'm probably not going to end up with the gourmet experience I wanted, but instead of me taking the hits, we'll share that mental load. And that's even more of a nervous system overload of, as a child, I'm not supposed to be in that position. But you bring up that point of, again, it's interesting how our bodies will feel experiences that are alike, and then we will respond based out of what that trauma response was in the past. Like, I'm only imagining what you're talking about with developing girls, of like just different stressors and anxieties and things. But when that hits, all of a sudden they go from being 15, 14, 13, whatever, to 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had it happen in my own life where I've been an adult. I had an experience in a restaurant that elicited back to a trauma that I experienced as a child of like, I felt that regression. I felt myself go from 34 to 7.
Wow.
And it's crazy because it took me a lot of work to be able to realize, like, oh, that's where I'm going.
Right.
And like being able to even verbalize that to my spouse, because I've invited her into that side of my life.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because how would have I responded without that knowledge? And normally I would have put myself in danger. I would have done something that would have exposed me in different ways, legally, ethically.
Right.
But those are my responsibility. Like, I am not responsible for the trauma that people freely gave to me, but I am responsible for my actions now.
Right.
And this is like where we get into this level of like hurt sharing, where so someone hurts me, so then I reach out and I hurt someone else. And we keep that cyclical behavior because we go, well, the last person mistreated me. Well, how about you be the last person?
Yeah. The ending of that chain.
Correct.
Be the
Break
cap
the
on
cycle.
that chain. Right. Yeah. And in that period of time, like, I had zero understanding of the human mind and how it worked and our nervous systems. And, I didn't understand any of that.
You weren't listening to audiobooks while you were like getting potable water?
No. But I can say now, if you have capacity for learning about how the brain works, one of the things that I absolutely love about some of the stuff that I've learned is that when you start to understand how the mind and nervous system work and your response to things, you make sense. Like, in the end, every single thing that you're doing, everything that you're feeling, everything that you're thinking, it makes sense physically. And when you can start to unravel how it works and you start to see where it makes sense, then a lot of those things, like, oftentimes we can feel guilt or regret around the way that we are thinking or feeling. And it might not be the thoughts and feelings or even the actions that we want to have. But if we begin to understand the why behind them and why they make sense, then we really have the power to change things. But until we have that understanding, we're kind of stuck in those cycles because we don't really recognize what it is that's keeping us there.
Yeah, we need the blueprints. And that's, I think, so many times when I sit down with certain people, they'll talk about like, how fast can we make this change happen in my life? Or how fast can I bring about this awareness? And I don't know if it's just me as a guy, but from the construction side, I kind of know how to work on homes and I know how to do certain things. And it's like, I always try to say, it's almost like trying to do a remodel in a house that we have no blueprints for. So we can take out walls, but do we know if those are load-bearing walls? Do we know that if there's something behind that wall? What happens when we hit something that's detrimental? Like, because if you're telling me that you want to do this fast, that means you're also not creating the space for you to really be a part of the process. Because this is going to be as fast as reasonably possible. Like, we're going to make movement, but if you want to say, I want to go leaps and bounds, that means you also want to leave things undone.
Right.
And those are the things that fester. Those are the things that create problems down the road. I always say the easiest metaphor that I have is sort of like burying a walnut and then being upset that you get a walnut tree. Like, No, it's going to grow. I mean, yeah, you can bury it. We can say it doesn't exist. But
Mhm.
at some point in time, you're going to wake up and the roots are there. You're going to go,
Right.
where did this come from? Well, I walked away from it. And in walking away from it, I didn't gain power. I gave it power over different areas of my life.
Um, all right. So we were going to move into kind of the signs of isolating.
Mm,
This is something that seems to be common in like the timeline for
yeah.
people who are in abusive relationships where it's not necessarily something that's happening right off the bat, but kind
Hmm.
of as you proceed down
Yep.
the trail, this inevitably pops up. And I know for me, it showed up in in pretty what's the word I'm looking for? I could see it coming because it was very consistent in where it was where it was applied. So
Hmm.
my my situation was one where I was keeping the appearances up as much as I could
Mm,
because if people started to understand what was going on, they became naturally concerned. And
hmm.
when somebody becomes concerned, they voice said concern, and then my spouse would be upset and angry, and it would create more
Hmm.
trouble in the home. So my attempt to keep appearances up made it to where I didn't he didn't feel like he had to isolate us from very many people. It wasn't like we
Hmm.
went out a lot. We were pretty kind of kind of back in our own little area, and I only had to go into town for a couple things. I had to go do my laundry,
Hmm.
and because we didn't have, a washer or dryer, and I'd have to go in and get groceries and those kind of things. And the town that was near where our cabin was about 7 miles away. So it wasn't very far, and my folks lived there.
Mm,
And so the people that I would see regularly were my parents, my mom
yeah.
and my dad. We would go to their house and I would do laundry. The kids would take baths. We would visit. The girls absolutely loved going there because my mom is just fun and they would play with toys
Yeah.
and it would be a great time passing time as we did laundry and whatever. But that also gave her a lot of insight into our situation. And she
Mm,
recognized things that were concerning and she brought those things up. And that created tension between my spouse and them, and then my spouse and me, because he did not want that
yeah.
brought up. So he started to limit the amount of time I could be there. And eventually he made it to where he wanted me to be doing laundry at our little tiny laundromat in
Yeah.
town instead
That
of going to
was
my
the
parents.
moment that like I had the epiphany and you sharing your story of like it gets to a point where the safest, most secure people in my whole life I come to accept are somehow hostile to me,
Right.
you
Right.
know. And like that's almost like the mass conversion of the gaslighting, right? Like you didn't want to do that. It doesn't make sense to do that, but you were again, I've got to survive.
Right. Yeah. I have to remove myself from my favorite place in the world right now. The
Mm,
place that I really actually feel a little bit of relief and peace
yeah.
because in the end, it's bringing more turmoil into my life. And yeah, I have to stay away from that. And I mean, they were really the only, there was probably a
Mm,
couple other friends in town that we might see every once in a while, but they were pretty much the only people that I went to see. And
mm,
that was really eye-opening for me when I was like, I can't even go and see my parents, or I feel like I have to hide it if I'm going to talk
yeah.
to my mom, or I feel like I have to hide it if I'm going to go see them. And to me, that was very eye-opening that this is not healthy.
Mm.
Yeah, that's
Did you have that epiphany like when you were making so your walk out of this process? You start the separation. I'm committed to me, to the health of the girls. Did you have an epiphany moment where you were like, I can't believe that I isolated myself from all these other things? Because like I've heard certain women say it's almost like when you're drowning and you pop out of the water and you take your first like deep breath, you're
mm,
like, I didn't realize that I limited myself from certain things.
I feel like even though I was really in survival mode,
Mm-hmm.
I was still very cognizant of the decisions that I was making.
Okay.
I was I knew why I did it. I thought through
Gotcha.
I'm one of those people that overthinks everything. So, I thought through everything that was going on. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I know they're right. I know what my
Mm-hmm.
folks are saying is right. They have
Mm-hmm.
every right to be concerned.
Yep.
And what is happening here is wrong, but I can't just give it up. I can't just give
Mm,
up. I have to try. And,
yeah.
they might not understand that piece, that in order for me to feel like I've done everything I can to make this work, that I have to try. And I think looking back, I realized that I was so focused on making it work and trying that I let it go too far.
Mm,
In the end, it was pretty obvious it wasn't going to work
yeah.
a long time before I finally admitted it. But
Mm-hmm.
I had to get it to a very, very obvious place for me to be like, okay, it's time. Let's finally
Mm,
hit that point. But I knew when I was isolating myself from them due to the request of my spouse that I was doing it to try to continue to work through this and make it work. And it
mm-hmm.
felt like a step I had to take in the moment. And it made sense in the moment.
Mm, yeah. Hmm. So was it the laundromat moment that was your real epiphany to recognizing like how isolated you had become?
I think when my mom walked in and I thought, now I have to try to explain to her why I'm here. And realizing how how much worse that
Mm-hmm.
made the situation look.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I can't keep pretending that it's okay at this point. Obviously,
Mm,
it's not okay. I can't keep putting up this front that everything's normal when it's
mm,
very much not normal. Like,
yeah.
there is no way that I can shape this to make it look okay.
Mm,
And I think in the moment I thought, well, they know it's not okay. I can't pretend it's okay anymore, but I'm isolated from them anyway. So the fact that they know that, it doesn't make my situation harder because
mm-hmm.
they really don't have much influence over my situation anymore.
Mm.
So it was okay that she knew that it was that bad because it wasn't going to make it worse, I guess.
Did you feel relief at all?
I think there was relief in not having to try to uphold this fake
Yeah.
reality. Yeah. Yeah. In that situation, that was kind of nice. It's like, well, it's just this bad. This is what I'm working with, but I'm still working on it. So you're just going to have to give me time.
Yeah.
But really hard
Mm.
for them. Really
Oh,
hard for my
absolutely.
parents. Yeah. Incredibly difficult to
Wasn't
watch.
easy for you either.
No.
But it
But
does
that,
sound like that was another catalyst moment where you could it's sometimes we use this as like a bunny foo-foo saying, but we ask people, do you feel seen? It seems like in that moment you were seen through the lie. Like, oh,
yeah, I did not feel very seen by many people because of how much effort I took to keep my
mm,
situation under cover.
oh yeah.
So it was not very well known because I was
Hmm.
pretty good at it. I
Yeah.
did a good job at that. Um, but in the end, I'm so glad that I had these few people that really did understand my situation, because having something that heavy and that big
Hmm.
to carry absolutely alone would have been so much harder. I
Yeah.
had a few people that I could lean on who understood what I had been through and how exhausted
Mm,
I was, because a lot of people had no idea how just overwhelmingly tired I was. But those people did. And they were really there for me when it mattered in the end.
so having survived this experience, And when we're talking about signs of isolating, like where do your little red flags pop up when you hear people talking about certain behaviors that could be isolating? How do you identify it, like in your work with other women?
Yeah. I mean, anytime that there's animosity towards somebody who is a support person or a support system for you is a red flag to me, because our spouse should be encouraging us to find support and to have a system of people around us that we trust and we spend time with and we go to when we have struggles, because sometimes our spouse is the perfect person to go to for something and sometimes they're not. And it should be okay to have outside people that are a support system for us. It should be encouraged and championed. And when that is discouraged, or when people are put down by a spouse and degraded or talked bad about, who are a support person, to me, that would be a big red flag.
Yeah. Just to tag on to that, I think there's also, if you can try, and I know it's difficult because our emotions are brought into it, but if our spouse or significant other is bringing in potential conflict towards someone and their points aren't objective, it's not about maybe how that relationship isn't working out for you or the pain you're experiencing in that relationship. And you can recognize that it's being framed that a secondary gain is being met for your spouse. Like, I don't want you to be around that person because they make you talk about our relationship, or you come back and we have conversations about our relationship or about my insecurities. If it's focused more on it is potential frustration for me for you to continue that relationship, and I think that's also a dog whistle to like, oh, wait a second. Like it's not about you're trying to make sure that I have a concert of support that's supportive of me. You're trying to groom to make sure that the support around us is beneficial for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And any time that it really comes back to, obviously, unless you're out there like spending the majority of your time with somebody other than your spouse, that's a whole different thing. But if they're frustrated because this person takes you away from them, or, you're no longer able to meet their every whim, that's another, anytime they're focusing your relationship with somebody else that doesn't really involve them on themselves. Yeah. That would be a red flag.
Yeah, to say the least.
And, a lot of the times with my folks specifically, it was just me, me and the girls. It wasn't like he was being drug into this relationship as well. And if your spouse is having significant issues with a relationship that isn't really his relationship, it's not like you're forcing this relationship on them. That'd be interesting, because there's no requirements, nothing it's not taking anything for them for you to have this relationship. And if it's an issue for them, that's kind of odd.
Yeah, I think it's those natural insecurities sort of making their appearance.
Yeah. We were gonna touch on gaslighting or brainwashing, and I would really like to get you probably have a great explanation of what that is, just because of what you do. I'm sure you encounter that in your practice a lot.
I do, especially because it seems like in the last 3 years, gaslighting has become like the social go-to word. I think sometimes we actually overuse it, or we even like water down what its real meaning is, because not everything is us being gaslit. But I think the best definition is if you actually understand where gaslighting came from. It actually came from essentially a screenplay that was written on a movie. You can actually watch it. It's way back in the day. It was like back in the 40s. But essentially, the whole reason why it's being called Gaslit is the premise of this movie is this husband who is a narcissistic butthole. Who,
To put it nicely.
to put it nicely, like to keep the PG rating here. But what happens is basically this wife keeps on saying, "Why are the lights so dim in the house?" And he keeps telling her the lights aren't dim.
Mm-hmm.
And he's literally making her feel crazy because she's like, "No, they're dark. Oh no, they're not dark. It's very bright in here." And so the best definition I have for gaslit is being rooted in the idea of fundamentally knowing a truth that's in front of you and having a very close relationship and a person who's a confidant for you telling you that what you are seeing or feeling or experiencing is not true.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens with the brainwashing side is when we essentially lose our compass in life, and that's what gaslighting is all about. It's about taking your natural compass, telling you that it is faulty, and then asking you to accept a different heading in your life. And what's crazy is if you experience this for a long enough period of time, that person doesn't even have to be in your life anymore, and you will actually further institute those voices and those sayings and those experiences you've had with them. Mm-hmm. You'll live your life based off of what their hierarchy is while constantly undermining and making their own points and how your life is not going well or you don't have power in your life.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, if you ask me, Adam, what's the scariest thing you work with? And I mean, I've worked with people who have been committed in institutions. I've worked with murderers, rapists. The scariest thing for me is when I sit down with someone who has lost their ability to know their internal compass, because you just live in active distress. Because it's like, well, I don't know what's up and what's down. Right. And so when you're lost in that, it's very easy for us to then just continue to perpetuate behaviors and decisions that continue to, change our lives and make it almost like irreversible in certain damages we cause to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like their voice, you continue to hear it, even if you're not with them anymore. It stays with you.
And that's why I use that phrase, the ghosts of the past, because sometimes I'll sit down with a person and, I've been blessed to have some clients for a very long time and they've made amazing progress and they go in a certain way in life, and then an anxiety pops up and we'll speak to what that fear is. And it's like, wow, that fear is not present in the past 3 years. Yeah. That's a fear from when you were 17 or you were 3 or all this. And you recognize like, oh, that was something that my parents told me, or that was something that my first husband told me, or that was, one of those narratives that I hadn't cleaned completely out. Mm-hmm. I sort of left that seed again, and it manifested in a different way. It became a mental vine. So what is it choking out in the way of your future prosperity?
Right. Yeah. And that's where, in my situation, I didn't totally understand. I didn't even vaguely understand a lot of these things. And when you leave a situation like that, it's like, oh, I'm out. That's it. Yeah. When you have kids, there's always that continued interaction, all that stuff still happening. But I didn't recognize how much I was bringing with me from that experience. Mm-hmm. And it took so many years before I recognized how much I had affecting me still from this experience that I needed to work through. And it's like the longer you go, the more those things are able to affect your current life, because you continue to have those voices influencing the direction that you go. And it just becomes a very messy web to untangle.
Well, I think you put it in a beautiful way, because I feel like we all think that we walk away from trauma like those great movie endings where you shut the door and you walk away from the building and it explodes. And you walk away in power, and you're like, I never have to deal with that again. But in reality, what happens is, we were just talking about the nervous system. So explain to me, Lindsay, how do you remember to breathe? And we can sit back and be like, oh, well, I don't really remember how to breathe. Perfect. Well, then if my trauma goes to root itself in my nervous system, what decisions are I making that's unconscious to me?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, so many.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Your response is like right on target, right? You're like, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Like, I still go out at different times and I'm in by certain times and I don't go to certain places. And I like those thought processes aren't conscious to you. You just navigate them. And it's in this idea of we are all, and it's amazing to really see this in the developmental process, but children are like such a gift because we can recognize that they're always seeking safety. And the more that we can internalize that is not something that leaves us, we are always seeking safety. Now we come to accept faulty outcomes as safety.
Right.
Oh, if I make sure that the house is clean enough, he'll come home and he'll choose me. That's me seeking safety. Oh, if I quiet myself more, she will actually see me as safe. She'll come to me. Nope. What I end up doing is I keep chopping parts of myself off, trying to sustain a miserable person. And some people, that's their own individual work. And so I think the real ways to identify this is to sort of like go through and journal your behaviors. I did this recently with a client that just started with me. I said, well, I want you to write what you used to do in your 20s, what you used to do in your 30s, and now what you do now at the age you are. And they were able to write down and they were like, oh, and you could hear the fun and the creative aspect of things that they used to do in their 20s. And then you could hear some of that survived in their 30s, but then they started writing down things that were more important about what other people thought, or trying to stay up with the status they've created. And then you reach to like present, and the creative aspects are gone. Now it's just all maintaining an identity. And if you really want to get into what's gaslighting, what's brainwashing, if you find that you're writing down that your top 10 things that you do in a day or a week or a year are all focused on maintaining the acceptance, the affirmation, the status of other people's thoughts or opinions on you, then you may find yourself in a spot that's gaslit or brainwashing because there's not much of you left in that process anymore.
Right. Well, that makes total sense. I'm in my mid 30s and I just recently kind of had an opportunity for transition. And those were kind of some of the thoughts that were going through my mind. Like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Am I doing these because they light me up and I want to do these? Or am I doing these because this is what I'm known to do? And if I stop doing this, I don't know who I am anymore. What is the why behind it? And if the why isn't because it lights me up or it's because, I want to help somebody and this is an opportunity I could do that. If it's just to maintain the identity that I'm comfortable in, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's comfortable.
I love it. Go for it.
It's not worth it. You gotta step out and do those things that are true to who you are in this moment. Like we are always changing. Who we are is always changing and evolving.
And that means our story has to always be able to change and evolve. I always say if you stop writing your story and start trying to tell a story, you can normally identify where the unhealthy side of you kicks in. Because the more that you try to tell someone this is the truth, normally means that I'm projecting it. It probably isn't. I'm not happy. I'm not healthy. But I want you to. It's the old adage of basically back in Rome, Caesar would have someone that would follow him around and tell him like how crappy he was.
Really?
Because, I forget which Caesar it was, but there was one Caesar that he recognized that essentially being raised to the level of like being a god on the planet was bad for his creative side. So he'd have a dude that would follow through and would be like, no, that's not right. That's not true.
I love it.
And what's crazy about it is, again, if you have to tell people you're the king or the queen, you're not the king or the queen. If
Right.
you have to tell people you're the boss, you're not the boss.
Yeah.
What you are is you're an insecure person playing that role.
Right.
And so that's why we have to continue to look at, how do I write this story? Where do I
Mhm.
go with this? This is an insecurity of mine. This is a discomfort of mine. But what we're talking about is a temporary feeling. It's not permanent. And
Right.
so the moment that we try to set something in stone, that's when it becomes permanent. And that level of rigidity rarely ever births anything that is long lasting or helpful.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. That's so interesting too, because it's easy for you see this play out for people that are in the spotlight a lot, where they have like some defining moment in their life, and then forever that is their, what defines their life, and they focus on that thing even though it maybe was like years and years and years ago. This is who they are this moment, and it really limits your potential, because then you're stuck at this moment. Like, this was it. This is as good as it gets. Now I got
Yep.
50 years left of my life, and this was my defining moment. And I just have to sit here and continue to glorify this versus, okay, where am I headed? What do I want to do? What's going to be my next thing that pushes me, that grows me, that, continuing forward after those things is really important. They don't define us. They're not who we are. They're just a part of the story. I really like that.
Yeah.
It's easy in trauma or in abuse and those types of things for those stories to feel like they do define us. And I think that can be a trap in a way. It's like, oh, this is who I am. But in reality, it's just a part of your story, and it doesn't have to be the defining moment or the
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the other, like, one final little tidbit on brainwashing is, if your joy or your potential happiness is rooted in the past and not the future, then that's brainwashing. Like,
end.
oh, well, remember we were so good then. Like, those are the people that are constantly living out of the past with nothing to look at the future. And if you find yourself in a position where your spouse or significant other is not constantly trying to better themselves, then you're going to fit into this like cesspool of stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very hard thing to live on, because we're choosing never to keep feeding ourselves. At that point, it's just managed decline. What's the acceptable loss from here forward?
Yeah. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there.